Joe, you were recently quoted in the Sunday Times about the future of work, and in particular, the rate at which we have embraced digital technology and the impact on jobs going forward. What's your take on the job market and particularly unemployment?
It's a very important question, Atul. And let's be clear. Technology has always displaced people from jobs. But throughout history, human beings have had time to adjust, to adapt to new technologies. My concern about the COVID-19 crisis is that the technology has accelerated. And the danger is that some people in some sectors will not be able to adapt or adjust quick enough. An obvious example is the high street, the retail sector. It was already in decline before the crisis, and the high street was diminishing.
Yeah.
But the problem is those people who were working in the shops, as many retailers go online, toward digital retailing, how many of those people will be able to acquire the skills necessary for a new era of retailing? And I have my concerns for those people in particular.
Yeah. So really, kind of, how do you think we can reskill those people? Because obviously, key to this is unemployment, and whether it's long-term unemployment, short-term unemployment. How do you think we can kind of reskill some of these people?
Well, let's be clear. People can be reskilled, but this is going to take time. It's going to take money. That's the key message I want to put across. This is not going to be a quick fix. Of course, there will be jobs in the care sector opening up, particularly post-Brexit, because we're going to have a shortage, we think, of people in that sector and in agriculture. But I don't expect the same people will go into those jobs in the care sector or into agriculture. But it can be done. But I think this really is a long-term vision. It's probably 5-10 years away before we really feel we've got a workforce that's ready and able to accept the changes that are coming towards us.
Okay, great. Joe, another question. The government has introduced unprecedented stimulus packages, and the message is very much spend, spend, spend. Two questions really here. A, how do you think we might pay for some of this spending? And B, could we just inflate our way out of the rising debt?
Yeah. Well, look, there's only three ways of paying for this debt that the government has now amassed. One is to cut back on public sector spending. Two, raise taxes. Three, to grow your way out of economic growth. Let me take the last point first. I'm not expecting long-term significant economic growth for the years to come, for decades to come. I think the UK has to accept it is a mature economy. Yes, I mean, growth of 1.5% to 2% will be very welcome if we achieve that on average for the next 10 years. But that will not be enough to erode the scale of debt. So I don't think we're going to be growing our way out of this debt situation. It leaves only two options: higher taxes or lower spending by the government, or both. I suspect it will be both. But I think the emphasis, this year is on spend, 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 as you said. I think it's next year and thereafter. I think we're going to see a number of tax increases that will creep up on us. Maybe the word creep is wrong. They may jump up on us. Examples would be VAT, for example, or even wealth taxes, taxes on those people who have savings, who are able to afford to pay more taxes. But your point about inflation is a very good one. Again, history has shown that governments have often allowed inflation to rise as a way of eroding the value of debt. Remember, the bonds issued by the government are a fixed value of debt. They will pay back £100 if they borrow £100. But £100 in 10 years' time will feel like a lot less because of inflation. Yeah. The problem with that point is this. We've had large-scale government borrowing for some years since the financial crisis, but we haven't seen inflation. So inflation, you can't make people spend more. You can't force prices up. A lot of the money that's been pumped into the economy has gone into assets, the bond market, property market, the stock market. So the government's got to engineer inflation somehow by, encouraging us to spend, spend, spend. You can lead the horse to the water, you can't make him drink it.
Yeah, getting that balance is going to be really, really tough, actually. And I think you're right, actually. I think tax rises will be inevitable, but they'll be very, very targeted in very specific areas. Great. Joe, you speak a lot about the changing spheres of influence, and throughout history it's kind of shown to bring both order and conflict. In light of the significant changes that are going on globally at the moment, where do you think this leaves the balance of power in terms of trade going forward?
Yeah, I think we are in a unique point in history. It's happening right in front of our eyes. I referred, as you said, to the spheres of influence. There are three major spheres of influence that represent the balance of power. The USA and the countries that are closely aligned with the USA, Europe and the countries aligned with Europe, and of course, China stroke Russia and the countries aligned with those two countries. Now, in terms of US, the US for the last 3 or 4 years has been looking much more inwardly and being much more protectionist. Now that can change, of course, after the next election in the US in November. I won't say more about that, but I think the US, its sphere of influence is changing, but still very, very important. Let's not underestimate this. My biggest concern is Europe. Europe is in an economic crisis. The UK is in transition and leaving the European Union on December 31st. And therefore, that sphere of influence is weaker at the moment and will be for some years. And the UK's influence is therefore weaker by definition because we'll be on our own. That leaves China. Now, China is going to come out of this COVID pandemic, I think, actually stronger because not because of the illness aspects of this, but because of the economic aspects. China has huge foreign currency reserves. They hold more dollars than any other country in the world outside of the USA. They have money. And I therefore believe the Chinese government will very smartly be looking to support countries out of this crisis. And in so doing, they will increase their sphere of influence and their role in the world. So I do see the balance of power, which was changing anyway, by the way, but I see it changing faster towards China and the countries aligned with China. That's, to my opinion, is inevitable. But it's also a reflection of the situation in the USA politically, and of course in Europe, both politically and economically.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Great. Final question, really. Brexit, you've touched on it. It's certainly been very quiet in the news until very recently. Have we got a perfect storm here for the UK economy?
Sadly, I think the answer is yes. And of course, the government doesn't want us to see this as a perfect storm. They want to see it as a perfect opportunity. But, words and rhetoric don't make things change fundamentally. The fundamentals are clear. If we leave the European Union without a trade deal on December 31st, we will have a hard Brexit. That hard Brexit will create uncertainty and challenges for the business sector in this country. That's a fact. It will also create risks for the future, in terms of what happens if the channel, is blocked. What if the French go on strike? What if the British go on strike? What happens to supply chains? Think of the car industry, etc. Think of the food industry. I mean, these will turn out to be the realities. Now, I'm an optimist at all times. Now, but again, that optimism doesn't change the facts. The facts are businesses are still facing uncertainty, not for the next 6 months, but for the next 2 or 3 years until things settle down. And to me, that's the biggest challenge, because if businesses feel uncertain about the future, going back to my earlier point, they will therefore be reluctant to invest more in an uncertain future. And investment is the engine of growth. We have to get investment in our economy moving at a pace that is appropriate for the 21st century. And I fear we are far, far behind the curve in that respect. So while I'm an optimist, I'm also a realist. And I think we have some tremendous challenges facing us, not only the next 6 months, but for the next few years ahead.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.